Welcome to the deep dive.
Mm.
You ever stop and think about how we make sense of the past, or how we try and guess what's coming next?
Yeah.
It often feels like we're building these neat stories, right? But what if those very stories, the ones that feel so right, are actually leading us astray, maybe towards overconfidence or illusions of understanding?
That's exactly what we're getting into today. We're drawing insights from thinking fast and slow, specifically looking at these psychological traps.
Right, so our goal for you listening is to unpack these biases, why we fall for them, and maybe walk away with some ways to think a bit more, well, realistically.
Exactly. We're essentially sense-making creatures, always trying to connect the dots, weave a narrative. But that drive for a coherent story, it can definitely cut both ways.
Okay, so let's dive right in. Nassim Taleb talks about something called the narrative fallacy. What exactly is that?
Okay, so the narrative fallacy, it's basically our tendency to create these, well, often flawed stories about past events. We simplify things.
Simplify how?
We make them seem more linear, more inevitable than they really were. And these simple stories then shape how we see the present and, crucially, what we expect from the future.
So we like neat stories. What makes a story grab us then in this flawed way?
Well, they tend to be simple, yeah, concrete. They often focus way too much on skill or intentions or even stupidity, and they seriously downplay the role of just plain luck or randomness. They highlight the big striking things that happened, but completely ignore all the things that didn't happen, which might be just as important. Our system one thinking, the fast, intuitive part, just laps this stuff up.
Got it. So our brain prefers a tidy plot, even if reality is, I don't know, more like a messy first draft.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Can you think of a recent example, something that happened where you could see this narrative fallacy starting to form?
Oh, sure. Think about, say, a company that suddenly blows up, becomes huge. It's so easy to build a story around the, genius CEO or one brilliant marketing move.
Right, the overnight success narrative.
Exactly. And while those things might play a part, that tight little story often ignores, like, broader market shifts or maybe technological changes that just happen to create the perfect conditions, or even just lucky timing. The simple story feels good, gives us that sense of understanding, but it's probably, well, too simple. Misleadingly simple.
And this connects to how we remember things too, right?
Hmm.
This idea that the stories we tell after an event can actually change how we recall what we thought before it happened. Let's talk about hindsight bias, the illusion of knowing.
Hindsight bias. Yeah, that's a really insidious one. The book uses the 2008 financial crisis as a prime example. After it happened, how many people claim they knew it was coming?
Loads. You hear it all the time.
But the book makes a crucial distinction. Thinking something might happen, having a suspicion, that's totally different from knowing it will happen. There is immense uncertainty beforehand.
Yeah, it's like claiming you knew the exact score of the game after the final whistle. Well, it's
Right.
easy then.
Precisely. Using that word "knew" retrospectively about something unpredictable, it just paints this false picture that the world is way more predictable than it actually is. It wipes away all the real uncertainty that existed before the event.
And it's not just about individuals feeling smug about their supposed foresight, is it? This has bigger ripple effects.
Oh, absolutely. It changes how we judge decisions and the people who made them. Think about a really surprising election result.
Okay.
Once the outcome is known, suddenly, in our minds, the winner's path to victory seems obvious, almost inevitable. We reinterpret all the preceding events through the lens of that final result.
So our brain is like a history editor, constantly revising the past to match the present.
You could say that, yeah. And it points to something fundamental. Once our perspective shifts, it's incredibly hard to accurately remember what we actually thought or believed before. The book mentions an experiment about death penalty attitudes. Participants were shown persuasive arguments, which shifted their views, but afterwards they really struggled to recall their original stance. They tended to think their current view was what they'd always believed.
Wow, that's slightly disturbing.
Mm.
Our present self just overwrites the past version. And how does this play out in terms of, say, accountability?
That's where it gets really important. Hindsight bias means we might unfairly praise people who took massive risks that just happened to work out.
Because it looks like genius in retrospect.
Exactly. We see the outcome as inevitable, so we credit skill, not luck. But the flip side is people who are cautious, who maybe raised sensible doubts about that risky path. They might get unfairly criticized for lacking vision, even if their caution was totally rational at the time.
As book says, a few lucky rolls of the dice can create this halo of prescience around a leader.
Okay, this feels like a natural transition to the business world. It's full of stories about the secrets to success. How does this illusion of understanding pop up there? Well, our system one, that fast, intuitive brain, it just loves order, predictability. So it readily accepts the idea that if we just understand past successes, we can replicate them, control the future. Business books and articles often feed right into this.
Giving us these neat formulas, right?
Hmm.
Do X, Y, and Z, and you'll succeed.
Pretty much. They link specific leadership styles or strategies directly to guaranteed results.
But reality's messier. How much impact do leaders really have?
They definitely matter, don't get me wrong. Research does show correlations between, say, CEO traits and how well a company does, but the effect is often much smaller than the stories suggest.
Smaller how?
Well, a reasonable estimate for the correlation might be around 0.30.
Point 0.3. So not insignificant, but
But it means a huge chunk of a company's performance, maybe 70% or more, is down to other things. Market conditions, luck, things outside the leader's direct control.
and this is where the halo effect messes things up further.
Precisely. When a company's doing great, we tend to think the CEO is brilliant, decisive, visionary, you name it, even if those traits aren't the reason for the success.
Uh-huh.
And conversely, if the company's struggling, suddenly that same CEO might be described as rigid, maybe indecisive. We often get the cause and effect backwards. The company might be failing, making the CEO seem rigid, not the other way around.
So success creates the perception of great leadership, not necessarily the other way around.
Often, yeah. Because luck plays such a big part, you just can't reliably tell how good a leader is just by looking at the current results. And studies back this up. Companies hailed as excellent often just, well, regress towards the average over time. The performance doesn't stay stellar.
So the business world, like our own memories, often seems much tidier in the retelling. Okay, let's shift slightly. Another illusion mentioned is the illusion of validity. This is about how confident we feel in our judgments, right? Even when maybe we shouldn't be.
Yes, and the book has a really vivid personal story about this. It's from the author's time in the Israeli army, evaluating potential officers using this exercise called the Leaderless Group Challenge.
Okay, what happened?
Well, they'd watch these candidates tackle a problem together, and despite it being a somewhat artificial setup, the observers, including the author, felt this powerful, immediate sense of knowing who the real leaders were. Their judgments felt incredibly solid, very convincing.
I can imagine. You see someone take charge, you think, yep, that's a leader.
Exactly that feeling. But here's the kicker. When they later checked these confident predictions against the candidate's actual performance in officer training, there was basically no correlation. Their confident assessments were not predictive.
Wow, no correlation.
Pretty much none. And what's fascinating is, even knowing this intellectually, knowing their judgments weren't very accurate overall, they still felt that confidence with each new candidate they watched. They couldn't shake the feeling that this time their judgment was right.
So that's the illusion of validity. Knowing something intellectually, but feeling something different intuitively. Like that optical illusion, the Miller-Lyer lines.
That's the perfect analogy the book uses. You know the lines are the same length, but you can't help but see them as different. Your intuition overrides your knowledge.
And this isn't just about army training, I assume. The book mentions Wall Street.
Right. There's an anecdote about visiting a Wall Street firm. The author chats with an investment manager and reflects on this basic puzzle. In every stock trade, there's a buyer and a seller. Both think the current price is wrong.
One thinks it'll go up, the other down.
Exactly. Both are confident they know something the market doesn't. But for most individual traders, certainly, that confidence is largely an illusion.
Because the efficient market idea suggests the price already reflects everything known.
Broadly, yes. That's the core idea from Burton Malkiel's A Random Walk Down Wall Street. If markets are efficient, consistently beating them by picking stocks is, well, extremely difficult, bordering on impossible for most.
And the data supports this.
Overwhelmingly. Research by Terry O'Dean, for instance, showed that individual investors, on average, consistently lose money compared to if they just did nothing. Their trades actually cost them money.
Really? Worse
Yes.
than doing nothing.
Yes, and interestingly, the most active traders, they tended to have the worst results. It seems the more confident they were in their ability to trade successfully, the more money they lost.
That feels so backward. You'd think more effort equals better results.
That's the illusion of skill in action. And there are other patterns too. Individual investors tend to sell their winning stocks too soon, but they hold on to their losers for too long, the disposition effect.
Hmm.
They also tend to buy stocks that are grabbing headlines, getting a lot of attention, rather than maybe making more fundamentally sound, less exciting choices.
What about the professionals,
Yeah.
mutual fund managers?
Even there, the evidence is sobering. A huge majority of actively managed funds underperform simple market index funds over the long run. And perhaps more tellingly, there's very little consistency in performance. A manager who has a great year is barely more likely than chance to have a great year the next year.
So mostly luck again.
It strongly suggests luck plays a massive role. The book even details an internal study at a firm looking at the year-to-year consistency of their own wealth advisors' investment outcomes.
Yeah.
The result, zero correlation, absolutely none. An advisor's success in one year gave no clue about their success the next. It was like comparing winners in a dice rolling contest.
Ouch. So why does the industry often seem to ignore this?
Well, acknowledging the huge role of luck and the limits of skill, it's threatening, isn't it? It challenges livelihoods, reputations, even self-esteem. The illusion of skill is kind of fundamental to the whole business model.
It seems this illusion of validity is just incredibly tough to shake. Okay, what about another group that makes predictions? Pundits, political experts. Do they fall into similar traps?
Oh, absolutely. Think about how we talk about history. There's often this narrative of the march of history, right? Where big events are attributed to clear causes, specific leaders, grand strategies.
Yeah, like it was all planned out.
Exactly. But this often massively downplays the role of sheer chance, of unpredictable twists and turns. The book uses figures like Hitler, Stalin, Mao Zedong. Yes, their actions were hugely consequential, but history could have unfolded very differently based on seemingly random events or contingencies around them.
So focusing just on the great man theory misses a lot of the picture. What about actual forecasting? Like political forecasting?
Well, Philip Tetlock did this huge long-term study on expert political forecasting, and the results were, frankly, pretty dismal.
How dismal.
On average, the experts performed about as well as, or sometimes worse than, just random chance like dart-throwing monkeys, as the saying goes.
Worse than chance, seriously.
In some cases, yes. And interestingly, having more specialized knowledge didn't necessarily make experts better forecasters. Sometimes it actually made them more overconfident in their flawed predictions. They developed more elaborate theories to justify their beliefs, even when reality wasn't cooperating.
So more knowledge can just mean more ways to be confidently wrong.
It can certainly enhance the illusion of skill. Tetlock made this distinction between hedgehogs and foxes.
Okay.
Hedgehogs know one big thing, one big theory they apply to everything. Foxes know many little things. They're more comfortable with complexity, uncertainty, and the role of luck. Tetlock found the foxes were slightly better forecasters, still not great, mind you. But the hedgehogs, with their simple, strong narratives, were the ones who got more media attention.
Because confidence sells, even if it's misplaced. Okay, this leads perfectly into comparing expert intuition versus, well, algorithms or formulas. The book mentions Paul Meehl's work here.
Yes, Paul Meehl's work from the 1950s was groundbreaking and initially quite controversial. He reviewed studies comparing clinical predictions made by trained psychologists, doctors, etc., with predictions made by simple statistical rules or algorithms.
And what did he find?
Consistently across dozens and dozens of studies in wildly different areas predicting student success, parole violations, medical diagnoses, loan defaults, you name it, the algorithms outperformed the human experts, or at least they did just as well. The experts were rarely better.
That's kind of shocking, even in complex areas like medical diagnosis.
Even there, this pattern where simple formulas beat expert judgment became known as the Meehl pattern. It's been replicated hundreds of times since. Predicting success in pilot training, business failures, credit risk, the formula often wins.
Can you give a specific example?
A really striking one is Orly Ashenfelter, an economist who created a simple formula to predict the future price of fine Bordeaux wines based only on weather data. The average temperature during the growing season, rainfall during harvest, things like that.
Just weather, not expert tasters.
Just the weather data. And his formula consistently predicted future auction prices years in advance, much better than the initial judgments of wine experts or the prices of young wines. The correlation was incredibly high.
Wow. So why? Why are simple formulas often better than experienced human judgment?
Well, a key reason is consistency. Humans are surprisingly inconsistent, even when judging the same information twice. Think about radiologists reading the same X-ray on different occasions. Their interpretations can vary. Algorithms, on the other hand, always apply the same rule, the same weights every single time. That consistency is a huge advantage.
We have off days, moods change, we get distracted.
Exactly. Experts also get swayed by irrelevant details. They might anchor on certain pieces of information, fall prey to biases we've discussed, and they can be overconfident in their intuitive feel for a case, giving it more weight than objective factors.
But some of these successful formulas are really simple, right? Like almost too simple. The book mentions Raman Dawes and improper linear models.
Yes, Dawes showed something remarkable. Even very simple formulas, where you just pick a few relevant variables and weight them equally, literally just add up the scores, often perform just as well as complex statistical models derived from large data sets, and still better than experts.
Weighting them equally, not even trying to figure out which factor is more important.
Often, yes. It's called the robust beauty of improper linear models. As long as you pick reasonably good predictors that point in the right direction, the simple sum often works surprisingly well. Dawes famously created a formula for marital stability.
Oh yeah, what was that?
It was simply frequency of lovemaking minus frequency of quarrels. He argued it predicted marital outcomes better than detailed clinical assessments.
Oh, that's definitely simple. And the APGAR score for newborns is another example.
Perfect example. Dr. Virginia Apgar developed a quick, simple five-factor score, heart rate, breathing, muscle tone, etc., assessed right after birth. It's incredibly effective at identifying babies needing urgent care, a simple, structured algorithm applied consistently.
Yet, despite all this evidence, there seems to be resistance to using algorithms, especially for important decisions about people.
There really is. We seem to have this inherent preference for human judgment, even flawed human judgment, over a formula. It feels more natural, maybe, less cold or mechanical. The wine world's reaction to Ashenfelter's formula was famously hostile. They felt it took the art and soul out of wine assessment.
Yeah, I can see that. It feels like we trust intuition, even when maybe we shouldn't. But didn't the author have an experience implementing a formulaic approach in the military?
Yes, a very relevant story. He was tasked with improving the interview process for selecting Israeli army officers. The old system was very much based on the interviewer's overall gut feeling after a general chat.
The standard interview approach, basically.
Right, so the new system they designed broke it down. They identified specific relevant traits like responsibility, sociability, things like that, and created specific factual questions to assess each trait independently on a numerical scale. Then, those scores were plugged into a formula to get a final suitability score.
How do the interviewers react?
Initially, not well. They felt like they were being turned into robots, just ticking boxes. They missed using their intuition, their overall judgment of the candidate.
I can understand that feeling.
So they compromised. The interviewers followed the structured process, scored the traits, and then at the very end, they were allowed to give their own overall intuitive score, their gut feeling.
And what happened when they compared the predictions?
The formula-based scores derived from the structured questions were significantly better predictors of the candidate's actual success in officer training than the interviewer's final intuitive judgments. The structured approach worked much better.
That's pretty definitive. So this leads to the practical advice in the book for hiring based on Meal and Dawes. How does that work?
It's basically about bringing that structured approach into hiring. First step. Identify maybe half a dozen key traits truly essential for success in that specific job. Make them as distinct as possible. Second, for each trait, design factual questions that probe past behavior or experiences related to it. Avoid general "what would you do" questions. Ask about actual past situations.
Got it. More concrete.
Third, decide on a scoring scale, say 1 to 5 for each trait, and be consistent. Critically, score all candidates on one trait before moving to the next. Don't score one candidate fully and then move on. This helps fight the halo effect.
Ah, smart. So you're comparing everyone on responsibility before you even think about teamwork.
Exactly. And finally, add up the scores for each candidate. Make your hiring decision based primarily on these total scores. Resist the powerful temptation to overrule the formula based on your gut feeling about someone during the interview. That discipline is key.
That sounds much more rigorous, though maybe less human in some ways. Okay, so formulas often win, but surely expert intuition isn't always useless. When can we trust it? The book brings in Gary Klein's research here.
Right. It's important to find the balance. Gary Klein studied experts in high-stakes, fast-moving environments like experienced firefighters. He found something different from the lab studies Meal often looked at.
What did he find?
These experts often didn't systematically compare options. Instead, based on their deep experience, they'd recognize a situation as familiar, as fitting a pattern, and almost immediately generate a single workable course of action. It's called the recognition-primed decision model.
So, pattern recognition based on experience.
Exactly. Which led Herbert Simon, the Nobel laureate, to define intuition as nothing more and nothing less than recognition. It demystifies it somewhat. It's not magic, it's learned memory, like a chess master instantly seeing a good move because they've seen thousands of similar positions.
Okay, so it's about recognizing patterns, but the book still warns about subjective confidence, right? Feeling sure doesn't mean you're right.
Absolutely crucial point. Both Kahneman and Klein, despite different perspectives initially, came to agree on this. How confident someone feels about their intuition is a poor guide to how accurate it actually is. You can feel completely certain and be completely wrong.
So, when are the conditions right for developing trustworthy intuition? What's needed?
The book boils it down to two fundamental conditions. First, the environment itself has to be sufficiently regular and predictable. There need to be patterns to learn.
Okay, like chess, maybe. The rules don't change.
Precisely. Chess is a high-validity environment. Second, you need the opportunity to learn these regularities through prolonged practice, and critically, with rapid, clear feedback.
Feedback is key.
Essential. So think about anesthesiologists. They administer a drug, they see the effect almost immediately. That's excellent feedback. They can develop reliable intuitions. Compare that to, say, a stock picker making long-term bets. The feedback is delayed, noisy, influenced by countless factors. It's very hard to learn reliable patterns there.
Or political forecasting, as we discussed. Low regularity, poor feedback.
Exactly. Those are low-validity environments. Robin Hogarth even talks about wicked environments, where the feedback you get might actually teach you the wrong lessons. So the bottom line is you can't really trust intuition in the absence of stable environmental regularities and the chance to learn them through practice and feedback.
So, anesthesiologists, yes. Long-term political pundits, probably not. Stockbrokers, probably not.
That's the general idea. In those low-validity domains, when you feel a strong intuition, it's likely your System 1 is using a heuristic, a mental shortcut, maybe substituting an easier question for the hard one, leading to a feeling of confidence that isn't actually justified by predictive skill.
Okay, this is making a lot of sense. Let's talk about another strategy for overcoming bias. Using the outside view. The book shares another personal story, this time about developing a school curriculum.
Right. The author was part of a team creating a new curriculum on judgment and decision-making for Israeli high schools. They were all experts in the field, very enthusiastic, and they put together an initial timeline.
Which is probably optimistic.
Very optimistic, yes. They estimated about 2 years, maybe 2.5 at most. Then they had a conversation with a seasoned curriculum expert, Seymour Fox. The author asked Seymour to place their team relative to other teams he'd known who had attempted similar projects.
Taking the outside view, basically. Asking for the base rates.
Exactly. And Seymour thought about it and rather uncomfortably concluded that based on his experience, most teams attempting such projects, maybe 40% of them, failed entirely. And among those who succeeded, very few finished in less than 7 years. He judged their team as being below average compared to the reference group.
Ouch. How did the team take that?
Well, it was a shock, but interestingly, they largely dismissed it. They felt their team was special, their circumstances unique. They stuck with their optimistic inside view.
And the actual outcome.
It lined up almost perfectly with Seymour's outside view prediction. The project dragged on for 8 years. The author left the team long before it finished, and ultimately the curriculum was never actually adopted or used by the schools.
Wow. A powerful lesson. So this really highlights the difference between the inside and outside view.
Absolutely. The inside view is our default. We focus on our specific case, our unique plans, our resources, our perceived advantages. We construct a scenario based on that specific information.
Makes sense.
The outside view forces us to ignore those specifics, at least initially, and ask, what happened when other people tried to do this same sort of thing? What are the statistics, the base rates for comparable projects or situations? It requires deliberately looking away from the specifics of your own case.
And the team's initial forecast was a classic case of the planning fallacy.
Textbook example. The planning fallacy is this pervasive tendency to make forecasts that are unrealistically close to best-case scenarios. We underestimate the time, costs, and risks involved, and we overestimate the benefits. We fail to allow for the unknown unknowns, the unexpected problems and delays that inevitably crop up in any complex project. Consulting the statistics of similar cases, the outside view is the best way to counter it.
But it seems we resist that outside view data, even when we get it, like the curriculum team did.
Yes, that's a key finding. Statistical base rates often feel pale and abstract compared to the vivid details of our own plans and intentions. We tend to give more weight to our specific knowledge, even if it's less reliable. People often feel their case is unique, and therefore the statistics don't apply to them.
This planning fallacy isn't just in curriculum development, is it? The book gives some big examples.
Oh, it's everywhere. Major construction projects are notorious for it. The Scottish Parliament building, mentioned in the book, had an initial estimate around £40 million and ended up costing over £431 million. Global studies of large transportation projects, like railways, show a systematic pattern of massive cost overruns and overestimated passenger numbers. Even home renovations usually take longer and cost more than planned.
Guilty is charged on that last one. Why does it happen so consistently? Is it just optimism?
Optimism is a big part of it, for sure. But there can also be strategic misrepresentation, deliberately lowballing estimates to get a project approved. And sometimes it's just a failure to imagine how things might go wrong, or how requirements might escalate once the project is underway. The book argues that decision-makers who approve plans have a responsibility to demand an outside view, to push back against overly optimistic forecasts.
So how do you actually do reference class forecasting, as Ben Fleivjerg calls it?
It's a systematic process. 1. Identify an appropriate reference class of similar past projects. 2. Get the statistics for that class data on costs, duration, success rates. This gives you a baseline prediction. 3. Use any specific information you have about your own project to adjust the baseline prediction up or down. But the key is starting with that statistical baseline from the outside view.
So anchor on the reality of past projects, then adjust. That makes sense. Okay, finally, let's talk a bit more directly about optimism and overconfidence themselves. The book actually says optimism is pretty normal.
Yes, it emphasizes that a degree of optimism is normal, healthy, and largely genetic. Optimists tend to be happier, more resilient, have better immune systems, and even live longer. They cope better with setbacks.
Sounds pretty good.
It is, generally. And optimists play a vital role in society. They're often the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the leaders who drive progress. They take risks, often more risks than a purely rational assessment would justify.
But there's a downside, too, the entrepreneurial delusion.
Exactly. While optimism fuels entrepreneurship, it also leads many founders to dramatically overestimate their chances of success. Surveys consistently show entrepreneurs think their specific business is far more likely to succeed than other similar businesses. They massively underestimate the actual failure rates in their industry.
Even inventors.
Yes, studies found many inventors persist with projects long after receiving negative feedback, often fueled by high optimism scores. And while we celebrate entrepreneurial success stories, the average financial return from self-employment is often pretty mediocre compared to traditional jobs. The risks don't always pay off for the individual, even if society benefits from their attempts.
And this overconfidence isn't just about business success. There's the general above-average effect.
Right. Most people believe they're better than average drivers, have a better sense of humor, are more ethical, you name it. While partly motivational, the book suggests it's also cognitive. We tend to judge ourselves against our own internal standard, which feels good, rather than accurately comparing ourselves to the statistical average.
And another related bias is competition neglect.
Yes. Entrepreneurs, companies, they focus intently on their own plans, their strengths, their market potential. But they often fail to adequately consider what their competitors are doing or how many competitors are thinking along the same lines.
Like multiple movie studios releasing blockbusters on the same weekend.
That's the exact example given from a former Disney chairman. Everyone thinks their film is great and will capture the audience, neglecting the fact that several other studios feel the same way about their films hitting the screen simultaneously. It leads to excess entry and often disappointing results for many, even if it's good for consumers.
And even supposedly rational financial experts fall prey to this overconfidence.
Oh, yes. That Duke University survey of chief financial officers is telling. They ask CFOs to predict the stock market's performance and also to provide an 80% confidence interval, a range they were 80% sure would contain the actual outcome.
Yeah.
Their point predictions were no better than chance. and their confidence intervals were way too narrow. The actual market outcome fell outside their 80% range far more often than the expected 20% of the time. They were hugely overconfident in their forecasting ability. They exhibited extreme, what you see is all there is, focusing only on what they knew, neglecting the vast unknowns.
And admitting that uncertainty is hard in that world, I guess.
Very hard. Providing realistically wide confidence intervals, basically admitting ignorance often isn't socially or professionally acceptable for financial advisors or pundits. Confidence is expected, even if it's unwarranted.
Wow. Okay, this has been a really thorough look at how our minds construct these narratives and illusions.
Yeah, we've covered quite a bit. From the narrative fallacy and hindsight bias shaping our view of the past,
Uh-huh.
to the illusion of validity, making us overconfident in our judgments, especially in unpredictable domains like finance or forecasting.
And then the planning fallacy, driven by that inside view, leading to overly rosy predictions. And underpinning much of this, the general human tendencies towards optimism and overconfidence.
Right. And the key takeaway, perhaps, is the value of stepping back. Cultivating that outside view, paying attention to base rates, questioning our subjective confidence, and understanding the limits of intuition, these are all crucial for making more grounded judgments.
Definitely. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Think about a significant decision you've made recently, or a strong belief you hold. Ask yourself honestly, how much was driven by a compelling story, or your specific inside view? What might the statistics, the outside view, suggest? Is it possible that a little more optimism or confidence crept in than the cold, hard data might actually support? Something to chew on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.